The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the sterile hallway of the VA Medical Center. It was 5:47 a.m., and the building was nearly empty except for the night shift staff finishing their rounds. Her weathered hands gripped the cart's handle firmly, the same hands that had once held an M4 carbine in the unforgiving terrain of Afghanistan. But here, in this moment, she was invisible, just another face in the sea of service workers that kept the world running while everyone else slept. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria had been working at the VA for 3 years now, since her medical discharge from the Army. The transition from Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, combat medic, to Maria, the night shift janitor, had been more jarring than any IED explosion she'd survived overseas. The weight of her former life pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible rucksack, one she could never quite set down. She'd chosen the night shift deliberately. Fewer people meant fewer questions, fewer sideways glances, fewer opportunities for well-meaning strangers to thank her for her service without truly understanding what that service had cost her. The darkness was her sanctuary, a place where she could move through the world unnoticed, cleaning up after others while trying to piece together the fragments of who she used to be. The VA Medical Center was a maze of interconnected buildings, each one housing stories of sacrifice, healing, and hope. Maria knew every corner, every room, every shadow. She'd perfected the art of being present yet invisible, essential yet overlooked. The doctors and nurses who rushed past her in their scrubs barely registered her existence. To them, she was just part of the furniture, a necessary but unremarkable fixture in their daily routine. But Maria saw everything. She saw the young Marine in room 314, who still called out for his squad leader in his sleep. She saw the Army veteran in the wheelchair who struggled to reach the water fountain, too proud to ask for help. She saw the families who kept vigil in the waiting rooms, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. She saw the pain that lived in these walls, the same pain that had taken up residence in her own chest. Her route took her past the physical therapy wing, where tomorrow's patients would relearn how to walk, how to hold a cup, how to write their names with prosthetic hands. She'd spent time there herself, not for physical wounds, but for the invisible ones, the kind that made her jump at car backfires and avoid crowded spaces. The therapists had been kind, professional, but there was always that distance, that subtle reminder that she was a patient now, not a soldier. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, cleaning a place dedicated to healing veterans, while her own wounds remained carefully hidden beneath long sleeves and a practiced smile. The tattoo on her left shoulder, a unit insignia surrounded by dates and coordinates that marked significant battles, stayed covered, a secret she shared only with her mirror each morning. Room after room, Maria worked with methodical precision, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, sanitizing surfaces. Each task performed with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to medical procedures in combat zones. Order from chaos, cleanliness from contamination. These were concepts she understood intimately. Whether she was treating a wounded soldier or scrubbing the hospital floor, the other cleaning staff were kind enough, but they occupied different worlds. They talked about their families, their weekend plans, their hopes for better paying jobs. Maria listened politely, but never shared. How could she explain that she'd once saved lives under enemy fire, that she'd held dying soldiers in her arms, that she'd earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with V-Device for valor? How could she bridge the gap between Staff Sergeant Santos and Maria the janitor? The truth was, she wasn't sure she wanted to bridge that gap. The uniform had given her purpose, identity, belonging. Without it, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The night shift suited her perfectly. She could be invisible, useful, but not expected to be anything more than what she appeared to be. As she worked, Maria's mind often drifted to her unit, the 6-8W combat medics who'd become her family during 3 deployments. She wondered where they were now, whether they'd found their way back to civilian life more successfully than she had. The bonds forged in combat were unlike anything else, deeper than friendship, stronger than family, forged in the crucible of shared danger and absolute trust. The cleaning cart squeaked slightly as she turned the corner toward the main lobby. She'd been meaning to oil that wheel for weeks, but somehow the sound had become comforting, a rhythm that marked her progress through the endless corridors. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was hers, a tiny signature in an otherwise anonymous existence. The lobby was vast and empty at this hour, its American flag hanging motionless in the still air. Maria had walked past that flag thousands of times, but tonight she paused. The memories came flooding back: ceremonies, deployments, the weight of the oath she'd taken. She'd served with honor, saved lives, made a difference. But standing here in her janitor's uniform, those accomplishments felt like they belonged to someone else, someone she used to be. The automatic doors of the VA Medical Center whispered open as Dr. Patricia Coleman arrived for her early morning rounds. It was barely 6 a.m., but as head of the psychiatric department, she'd learned that the quiet hours before the hospital fully awakened were often the most productive. Her heels clicked against the freshly mopped floors as she made her way to the elevator, barely registering the cleaning woman who nodded respectfully as she passed. Maria had perfected the art of acknowledgement without engagement, a slight nod, a ghost of a smile, eye contact that lasted exactly long enough to be polite, but not long enough to invite conversation. She'd learned to read the body language of the medical staff, the ones who genuinely didn't see her, the ones who saw her, but preferred to pretend they didn't, and the rare few who actually acknowledged her humanity. Dr. Coleman fell into the third category. She always nodded back, sometimes even said, "Good morning," in a voice that suggested she actually meant it. Maria appreciated that small kindness, even if it never went beyond pleasantries. In her previous life, she might have felt comfortable striking up a conversation with someone like Dr. Coleman. They were both women in demanding professions, both dealing with trauma and healing in their own ways. But that was before, when she wore oak leaves on her collar instead of a name tag on her uniform shirt. The elevator carried Dr. Coleman to the 4th floor, where her office overlooked the courtyard. From her window, she could see the memorial garden where veterans often sat in quiet contemplation. It was a beautiful space, carefully maintained, with benches positioned to catch the morning sun and evening shade. She'd often wondered who took such meticulous care of the grounds, but like many busy professionals, she'd never thought to find out. Down in the basement, Maria was restocking her supplies from the utility room. The space was cramped and poorly lit, filled with industrial cleaning products and the accumulated detritus of a large medical facility. It was here, in moments of solitude, that she allowed herself to remember. The smell of disinfectant sometimes triggered memories of field hospitals, of triage situations where she'd had to make split-second decisions about who could be saved and who was beyond help. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She was surrounded by veterans receiving care, veterans being honored, veterans sharing their stories in group therapy sessions she could hear through the thin walls. Yet she remained hidden, her own service record locked away like a classified document. The other cleaning staff knew she was former military. Her posture, her attention to detail, her instinctive response to loud noises gave her away. But they assumed she'd been a supply clerk or maybe military police. They couldn't imagine that. The quiet woman who emptied their trash cans had once been trusted with the lives of elite soldiers. Maria's supervisor, Janet Walsh, was a good woman who'd been managing the night custodial staff for over a decade. She'd seen all types come through the VA's doors, some seeking help, others seeking work, many seeking both. There was something different about Maria, something that suggested depths below the surface, But Janet had learned not to pry. Veterans often carried burdens that weren't meant for casual conversation. "Maria, you're doing excellent work on the 4th floor," Janet mentioned during their brief check-in. Dr. Coleman specifically complimented the cleanliness of the psychiatric wing. She said it makes a difference for the patients. Maria nodded, accepting the praise with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else. She didn't mention that she paid special attention to that wing because she understood what those patients were going through. She'd seen the same haunted looks in her own mirror, felt the same invisible weight that seemed to follow them through their daily routines. The psychiatric wing was where Maria felt most connected to her surroundings, even if no one knew why. The veterans there were dealing with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, depression, anxiety conditions that didn't always leave visible scars, but could be just as debilitating as any physical wound. She'd listened to fragments of their conversations during group sessions, recognizing the struggle in their voices, the careful way they chose their words when describing experiences that civilian minds couldn't fully grasp. Sometimes, late at night, when the wing was quiet, Maria would pause outside the group therapy room. The chairs would be arranged in a circle, ready for the next day's sessions. She'd imagine herself sitting in one of those chairs, finally talking about her experiences, sharing the weight she'd been carrying alone. But the fantasy never lasted long. She couldn't risk exposure, couldn't handle the questions that would inevitably follow if her real identity became known. The truth was, Maria had tried traditional therapy after her discharge. The VA had provided excellent care, and she'd worked with several compassionate therapists. But there was always a gulf between her experiences and their understanding. How could she explain the hypervigilance that never left her, the way she automatically identified exits and potential threats in every room? How could she describe the guilt of surviving when others hadn't? The weight of decisions made under fire, the way certain sounds or smells could transport her back to a battlefield thousands of miles away? Working nights had become her therapy. The physical labor helped exhaust her body enough to sleep, and the routine provided structure when everything else felt chaotic. She'd found purpose in maintaining the space where other veterans received care, even if her own healing remained incomplete. The memorial garden had become her unofficial responsibility. Though it wasn't part of her job description, she'd arrive early or stay late to tend to the plants, to ensure the memorial plaques were clean and readable. It was her way of honoring the fallen, of maintaining a connection to her military service without having to explain that connection to anyone else. Dawn was breaking over the VA Medical Center as Maria completed her rounds on the 2nd floor. The early morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the hallways she'd walked countless times. Her shift was nearly over, but she had one more stop to make, the memorial garden that had become her sanctuary. The garden was accessible through a side door from the main lobby, hidden from the busy traffic of the hospital's daily operations. Maria had discovered it during her first week on the job, drawn by the quiet dignity of the space. Granite markers bore the names of local veterans who'd passed away, surrounded by carefully maintained flower beds and benches positioned for contemplation. She'd begun tending to the garden unofficially, arriving early to water the plants and remove any litter that might have accumulated overnight. The facility's management team had noticed the improved condition of the space, but never investigated who was responsible. Maria preferred it that way. Her service to the garden was personal, a way of honoring her fallen comrades without having to explain her connection to them. The morning ritual had become essential to her routine. She would sit on the bench facing the main memorial wall, close her eyes, and mentally recite the names of soldiers she'd lost in combat. It was her way of carrying them forward, of ensuring they weren't forgotten in the bureaucratic maze of military statistics and casualty reports. This particular morning, as she deadheaded the roses near the entrance, Maria noticed something different. Someone had left a small American flag near one of the newer memorial plaques. The flag was perfectly positioned, its fabric crisp and unwrinkled despite the morning dew. It was the kind of detail that would go unnoticed by most visitors, but Maria's trained eye caught it immediately. She picked up the flag carefully, examining it for any clues about who might have left it. The gesture was clearly intentional. Someone else was using this space for their own private remembrance. The thought comforted her. She wasn't the only one who found solace in this quiet corner of the VA complex. Back inside, the day shift was beginning to arrive. Maria gathered her supplies and prepared to clock out, but she noticed an unusual amount of activity in the main lobby. A group of men in dress blues was setting up for what appeared to be some kind of ceremony. One of them, a Master Chief Petty Officer, was directing the placement of chairs and a portable podium. Maria recognized the preparations immediately. Someone was about to receive recognition for their service, probably a retirement ceremony or an award presentation. She'd participated in hundreds of similar events during her military career, both as a participant and as a recipient. The precise choreography of military ceremony was as familiar to her as her own reflection. She tried to slip past unnoticed, but the Master Chief's voice stopped her in her tracks. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you facility management?" Maria turned, her heart rate increasing slightly. Direct questions from military personnel always made her nervous, as if they might somehow see through her civilian disguise. "No, I'm just custodial staff, finishing my shift. Any chance you know who's been taking care of the memorial garden?" "Out back? Whoever's doing it is doing outstanding work. We've got a family coming in later to visit their son's memorial, and they're going to be impressed." For a moment, Maria considered telling the truth. The words were right there, ready to tumble out. "That's me. I take care of it because I understand what it means. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. I know what it's like to lose people." Instead, she shook her head. "I'm not sure. Maybe the groundskeeping crew?" The Master Chief nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face for just a moment. Longer than necessary. There was something in his expression, not suspicion, but recognition. As if he sensed something familiar in her bearing, her response, her carefully neutral demeanor. "Well, whoever it is, they're doing right by these fallen heroes. That kind of dedication doesn't go unnoticed." Maria nodded and excused herself. But the Master Chief's words followed her to the employee parking lot. That kind of dedication doesn't go unnoticed. If only he knew how much she needed to go unnoticed, how much her anonymity protected her from questions. She wasn't ready to answer. The parking lot was nearly empty as she walked to her 10-year-old Honda Civic. The car was reliable, but unremarkable. Much like everything else in her carefully constructed civilian life. She'd learned to value reliability over recognition, function over form. The car got her to work and back home, and that was enough. As she drove through the quiet streets toward her small apartment, Maria reflected on the Master Chief's words. Someone was coming to visit their son's memorial. She thought about the mothers and fathers who'd visited the memorial garden during her shifts, the way they'd kneel beside the plaques and speak in whispered conversations with their lost children. She'd watched from a distance, respecting their privacy while ensuring they had the space they needed for their grief. These moments reminded her why her work mattered, even if no one knew the full extent of her connection to it. She wasn't just cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. She was maintaining a sacred space where families could honor their loved ones. It was a form of service, even if it wasn't recognized as such. Her apartment was Spartan but clean, decorated, with a few personal items that revealed nothing about her military background. The only photograph was of her parents, taken shortly before her father's death 5 years earlier. He'd been proud of her service, proud of her choice to become a medic. "You'll save lives," he'd told her before her first deployment. "That's what matters." He'd been right, of course. She had saved lives. But she'd also lost some, and the weight of both achievements and failures had followed her home. as Maria settled into sleep that night. She had no idea that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to be challenged. The next few weeks would bring encounters that would force her to confront the very identity she'd been trying to escape. 3 weeks later, Maria was completing her usual rounds when she noticed something different about the atmosphere in the VA Medical Center. Security was tighter, and there seemed to be more official-looking personnel moving through the corridors. She'd learned to read the signs whenever high-ranking military officials visited. The entire facility shifted into a higher state of readiness. It was approaching the 1,500-word mark in her mental countdown of the evening's events when she received word from Janet that a special ceremony was being held in the main auditorium. A Navy SEAL team was being honored for their recent humanitarian mission in Southeast Asia, and the event was expected to draw significant attendance from both military and civilian leadership. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria's stomach tightened at the mention of Navy SEALs. She'd worked alongside special operations units during her deployments, providing medical support during high-risk missions. The SEALs she'd encountered had been professional, skilled, and utterly dedicated to their mission. They'd also been some of the most observant people she'd ever met, trained to notice details that others missed, to read situations and people with uncanny accuracy. The auditorium was off-limits to custodial staff during the ceremony, but Maria would need to clean it afterward. She tried to focus on her other tasks, but her mind kept drifting to the event happening just one floor below. She could hear the muffled sounds of applause and formal speeches through the building's ventilation system. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to disperse, Maria prepared her cleaning supplies for the post-event cleanup. The auditorium would need to be returned to its normal state quickly, as it was scheduled for a veteran support group meeting the following morning. She'd done this routine countless times: slip in after events, clean efficiently, and disappear before anyone could ask questions. But tonight would be different. Maria entered the auditorium through the service entrance, her cart squeaking softly as she navigated between the rows of chairs. The stage was still decorated with military banners and American flags, and the podium bore the seal of the United States Navy. Program materials were scattered across seats, and the usual post-ceremony debris needed to be collected. She was working methodically through the third row when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw a tall man in navy dress blues approaching. He was clearly one of the honored SEALs. His bearing, his ribbons, and the distinctive trident on his chest made that immediately obvious. Maria's training kicked in automatically. Acknowledge respectfully, minimize interaction, continue working. Evening, ma'am. I left my phone up here somewhere during the ceremony. Mind if I look around? His voice was calm, professional, but Maria detected something else in his tone, a careful attention that suggested he was studying her as much as he was searching for his phone. She nodded and continued her work, hoping he would find his device quickly and leave. I'm Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rivera, he said, extending his hand. I wanted to thank you for the work you all do here. This place means a lot to people like us. Maria shook his hand briefly, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of serious physical training. Just doing my job, she replied, then immediately regretted the response. It sounded dismissive, which wasn't her intention. Chief Rivera didn't seem offended. Instead, he continued his search while making casual conversation. This is a beautiful facility. I've been to VAs all over the country, and this one really stands out. Someone's putting extra care into maintaining it. Something in his tone made Maria look up from her work. He was watching her with the kind of focused attention that made her uncomfortable. Not threatening, but analytical, as if he was processing information about her that she didn't realize she was providing. The memorial garden outside is particularly well maintained, he continued. Whoever's responsible for that has real respect for what it represents. Maria's hands stilled on her cleaning supplies. She'd been so careful to keep her involvement with the garden secret, but somehow this seal had connected her to it. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe someone had seen her there. Maybe there were security cameras she hadn't noticed. "I wouldn't know about that," she said, but the words came out too quickly, too defensive. Chief Rivera found his phone on the floor near the stage. But instead of leaving, he sat down in one of the chairs she'd just cleaned. "You know, I've been around enough veterans to recognize certain things. The way someone carries themselves, how they respond to military courtesy, little details that most people don't notice." Maria's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of attention she'd been trying to avoid. She continued cleaning, hoping he would take the hint and leave, but he seemed in no hurry to go. "My grandmother was a nurse in Vietnam," he said. She never talked about her service, but you could tell it had shaped her. She had this way of taking care of people without making a big deal about it. Always noticed when someone needed help, even if they didn't ask for it. The comparison made Maria's chest tighten. She'd met many veterans who'd served in silence, who'd carried their experiences like private burdens. The recognition in his voice was both comforting and terrifying. "I should finish up here," she said, focusing intently on collecting programs from the floor. "I'm sure you have places to be." But Chief Rivera wasn't finished. "You know what's interesting? I've been watching the memorial garden for the past few weeks. Same person tends to it every morning, always around the same time, very methodical, very respectful. The kind of attention to detail you'd expect from someone who understands what that place represents." Maria's blood ran cold. He'd been watching her, not in a threatening way, but with the professional observation skills that made special operations personnel so effective. She'd been so focused on avoiding attention from the day shift that she'd never considered someone might be studying her morning routine. "Like I said, I wouldn't know about that," she repeated. But even she could hear the weakness in her own voice. Chief Rivera stood up, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just recognize dedication. When I see it, whatever your connection to this place, whatever brings you here every day, I want you to know it doesn't go unnoticed." He started to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and ma'am? Thank you for your service." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She hadn't heard that phrase directed at her in years, and coming from someone who clearly knew she was a veteran, it carried weight she wasn't prepared for. Her carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. Chief Rivera left the auditorium, but his presence lingered in the air like smoke. Maria finished her cleaning in record time, her mind racing through the implications of their conversation. He knew she was a veteran. He'd been watching her tend the memorial garden. He'd seen through her civilian disguise with the practiced eye of someone trained to read people and situations. The following week passed in a blur of anxiety and hypervigilance. Maria found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if Chief Rivera had shared his suspicions with anyone else. The comfortable anonymity she'd built over 3 years was under threat, and she didn't know how to protect it. She'd considered changing her schedule, maybe switching to a different shift or even finding work at another facility. But the VA Medical Center had become her sanctuary, the one place where she felt useful and connected to something larger than herself. The thought of starting over somewhere else filled her with dread. Her work in the memorial garden became even more important. During this period of uncertainty, she arrived earlier each morning, staying longer to ensure every detail was perfect. The physical labor helped calm her mind, and the quiet ritual of tending to the plants provided structure when everything else felt chaotic. It was during one of these extended garden sessions that she encountered Chief Rivera again. She was pruning the roses near the main memorial wall when she heard his voice behind her. "Good morning, ma'am. Beautiful work out here." Maria's heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to continue working. "Good morning, Chief. Just helping out where I can." He approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back in a casual military posture. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been curious about something. That tattoo on your shoulder, I caught a glimpse of it the other night when you were reaching for something high up." Maria's hand instinctively moved to her left shoulder, where her unit insignia was hidden beneath her uniform shirt. She'd been so careful to keep it covered, but apparently not careful enough. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Chief Rivera nodded toward the memorial wall. "That design on your shoulder, it's a medical corps insignia, isn't it? Combat medic, if I had to guess. The coordinates underneath probably mark significant battles or operations." The accuracy of his observation left Maria speechless. She'd underestimated just how much he'd been able to see, how much he'd already figured out about her background. The tattoo was like a roadmap of her military service, and he'd read it correctly. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she sighed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Ma'am, I've worked with combat medics in some of the toughest places on Earth. I know what that kind of service looks like, and I know what it costs. You don't have to hide it from me." Maria stood up slowly, her gardening tools forgotten. The moment she'd been dreading for 3 years was finally happening. Someone had seen through her carefully constructed civilian identity, and there was no going back. "What do you want?" she asked, resignation creeping into her voice. Chief Rivera's expression softened. "I want to thank you properly, and I want to ask you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. "I've been carrying this around for a week, hoping I'd run into you again. It belonged to a medic I served with in Afghanistan. He didn't make it home, but his family gave this to me before his funeral. They said it should go to someone who would understand what it meant." Maria unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a small metal pin, a combat medical badge with a star indicating multiple awards. The sight of it hit her like a physical blow. She'd earned the same badge herself, but hers was locked away in a box in her apartment, too painful to display. "I can't accept this," she said, trying to hand it back. "Yes, you can," Chief Rivera said firmly. "You earned the right to wear it, and you deserve to be recognized for what you've done. Not just in combat, but here. This place is better because of you." Maria's hands shook as she looked at the badge. It represented everything she'd tried to leave behind: the responsibility, the weight of life and death decisions, the brotherhood of warriors who'd served together in impossible circumstances. "You don't understand," she said. "I lost people. I made mistakes. I'm not the hero you think I am. Ma'am, with respect, I don't think you're a hero. I know you are. Heroes don't call themselves heroes. They just do what needs to be done, whether anyone's watching or not. That's what you've been doing here for 3 years." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Coleman, who was making her way to the main building for her morning rounds. She paused when she saw them together, her expression curious but respectful. "Good morning, Maria. Chief Rivera. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Maria realized that Dr. Coleman had used her first name, something that had never happened before. The psychiatrist had been observing her more closely than she'd realized, probably making her own connections about Maria's background. "Not at all, Dr. Coleman," Chief Rivera replied. "I was just thanking Maria for the outstanding work she does maintaining this memorial garden. It's clear she understands what this place represents." Dr. Coleman smiled. "Yes, I've noticed the improvement in the garden's condition. It's become quite beautiful under her care. I often recommend it to my patients as a peaceful place for reflection." The weight of their combined attention was almost overwhelming. Maria felt exposed, vulnerable, as if her carefully constructed walls were crumbling around her. These two professionals had seen through her disguise, had recognized something in her that she'd been trying to hide. "I should get back to work," she said, gathering her gardening tools with nervous efficiency. "Of course," Dr. Coleman said. "But Maria, if you ever want to talk professionally or otherwise, my door is always open. I have a feeling we might have more in common than you realize." As both the doctor and the SEAL walked away, Maria remained in the garden, clutching the combat medical badge in her trembling hands. The life she'd built in the shadows was beginning to collapse, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever came next. The combat medical badge felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as Maria sat in her apartment that evening, staring at it on her kitchen table. She'd placed it there hours ago, unable to put it away, but equally unable to stop looking at it. The small piece of metal represented everything she'd tried to leave behind and everything she'd never been able to fully abandon. Her apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. She'd chosen this place specifically for its isolation, no neighbors who might ask questions, no community spaces that encouraged interaction. It was a sanctuary of solitude where she could exist without explanation or recognition. But now that sanctuary felt more like a prison. Maria made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, finally picking up the badge to examine it closely. The metal was worn smooth in places, evidence of years of wear by its previous owner. She wondered about the medic who'd originally worn it, about the circumstances of his death, about the family who'd chosen to give it to Chief Rivera rather than keep it as a memorial. The gesture represented everything she'd been running from: recognition, connection, the weight of shared experience. For 3 years, she'd convinced herself that anonymity was protection, that invisibility was safety. But Chief Rivera's words echoed in her mind. Heroes don't call themselves heroes. They just do what needs to be done, whether anyone's watching or not. She thought about the veterans she'd observed in the VA psychiatric wing, the ones who'd found the courage to sit in those therapy circles and share their stories. They'd seemed so brave to her, so willing to be vulnerable in ways she'd never been able to manage. But maybe they weren't braver than her. Maybe they'd just reached a different point in their journey. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to find a note taped to her locker. It was from Dr. Coleman, written in neat handwriting on hospital letterhead. "Maria, I meant what I said about my door being open. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight alone. You don't have to, Dr. Coleman." The note was brief, but loaded with meaning. Dr. Coleman had clearly put together more pieces of Maria's story than she'd realized. The psychiatrist's offer wasn't just professional courtesy, it was recognition from one professional to another, an acknowledgement that Maria's struggles were valid and her service had value. Maria folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. She wasn't ready to take Dr. Coleman up on her offer, but knowing it existed provided a small measure of comfort. For the first time in years, she felt like she might have options beyond hiding and enduring. Her morning routine in the memorial garden took on new significance after her conversation with Chief Rivera. She found herself reading the names on the memorial plaques more carefully, thinking about the stories behind each one. These were people who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd left behind families and friends who still mourned their loss. But they were also people who'd been remembered, honored, celebrated for their service. Their names were engraved in stone, their sacrifices acknowledged in a permanent way. They hadn't been forgotten or relegated to the shadows. They'd been claimed by a grateful nation as heroes worthy of recognition. Maria wondered what it would feel like to be remembered that way, to have her service acknowledged rather than hidden. The thought was both terrifying and oddly appealing. She'd spent so long defining herself by what she'd lost her identity, her sense of purpose, her place in the world, that she'd forgotten what she'd gained through her service. The morning shift change brought its usual flurry of activity. But Maria noticed something different in the way people looked at her. Word had somehow spread about her interaction with Chief Rivera, and several staff members nodded at her with what seemed like new respect. The change was subtle but unmistakable. She was no longer completely invisible. Janet, her supervisor, approached her with a clipboard and an expression Maria couldn't quite read. "Maria, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come to my office?" Maria's heart rate spiked. Had she done something wrong? Had someone complained about her interaction with Chief Rivera? She followed Janet to the small office near the service elevator, her mind racing through possible scenarios. "Sit down, Maria," Janet said, but her tone wasn't disciplinary. If anything, she seemed nervous. "I got a call from administration this morning. Apparently, Chief Rivera spoke with the facility director about you." Maria's stomach dropped. This was that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to be destroyed completely. She braced herself for questions she wasn't ready to answer, for exposure she'd spent 3 years trying to avoid. "He told them about the memorial garden," Janet continued. "About how well you've been maintaining it, how much respect you show for what it represents. They want to officially recognize your contribution." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Recognition was the last thing she wanted. It would mean questions, attention, the kind of scrutiny that would inevitably reveal her true background. She'd taken care of the garden as a private act of service, not as a bid for acknowledgement. "I don't want any recognition," she said quickly. "I was just doing what needed to be done." Janet studied her face carefully. "Maria, I've been managing custodial staff for a long time. I know when someone's running from something, but I also know when someone's running towards something. You've been taking care of this place like it's personal, like it means something to you beyond just a job." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Maria had been treating the VA Medical Center like a sacred trust, maintaining it with the same dedication she'd once brought to caring for wounded soldiers. The connection hadn't been conscious, but it was undeniable. "What kind of recognition?" she asked reluctantly. "They want to feature you in the hospital newsletter, maybe have a small ceremony. Chief Rivera suggested you might be more comfortable with something private, but the administration thinks your story could inspire other veterans who are struggling with their transition." The idea of her story being public, of being held up as an example or inspiration, made Maria's chest tighten with panic. She'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility, and now they wanted to put her in the spotlight. "I can't do that," she said firmly. "I'm just custodial staff. I don't have a story worth telling." Janet leaned back in her chair, her expression skeptical. "Maria, I've been around veterans long enough to know that nobody maintains a memorial garden with that kind of dedication unless they have a personal connection to it. Chief Rivera seems to think you've got a military background." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Maria could continue lying, continue hiding, continue living in the shadows of her own life. Or she could take the first small step toward acknowledging who she really was. "I served," she said quietly. "But that was a long time ago. I'm different now." "Different how?" Janet asked gently. Maria struggled to find the words. How could she explain that she'd once been a leader, a skilled professional, someone who'd made life and death decisions under impossible pressure? How could she bridge the gap between Staff Sergeant Santos and Maria the janitor? "I used to save people," she said finally. "Now I clean up after them." The admission felt like a dam breaking. For 3 years, she'd carried the weight of that transformation alone, never acknowledging the loss of identity that had come with her transition to civilian life. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that was both terrifying and liberating. Janet nodded slowly. "And you don't think maintaining this place, creating a safe and clean environment for veterans to heal, isn't a form of saving people?" The question stopped Maria cold. She'd never thought of her work in those terms, but there was truth in the observation. She'd been serving veterans all along, just in a different capacity than she'd served them in uniform. "It's not the same," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Janet agreed, "but it's still service. And Chief Rivera seems to think it's service worth recognizing." Maria left the meeting with more questions than answers. The administration wanted to honor her contribution, but accepting that honor would mean revealing parts of herself she'd kept hidden for 3 years. The thought of exposure filled her with dread, but there was also a small part of her that yearned for acknowledgement, for the chance to be seen as more than just the invisible woman who cleaned their floors. As she returned to her duties, Maria found herself thinking about the veterans she'd observed in the psychiatric wing. They'd found the courage to share their stories, to be vulnerable in front of strangers, to accept help when they needed it. Maybe it was time for her to find that same courage. But courage, she was about to learn, sometimes came in unexpected forms and from unexpected encounters that would change everything. 2 days later, Maria was working her usual shift when she received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Coleman appeared in the hallway where she was mopping, but instead of her usual professional attire, she was wearing casual clothes and carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "Maria, I hope you don't mind the interruption. I brought these for the memorial garden. They're from my own garden at home. I thought they might add some color to the space." The gesture was simple but meaningful. Dr. Coleman wasn't just acknowledging Maria's work. She was contributing to it, participating in the care of the memorial in a way that suggested she understood its importance. "That's very kind of you," Maria said, accepting the flowers. "I'm sure they'll look beautiful out there. I was hoping you might show me around the garden, actually. I'd love to learn more about how you've organized it, what plants you've chosen. I have several patients who might benefit from spending time there, and I want to make sure I'm describing it accurately." The request was casual, but Maria sensed there was more to it. Dr. Coleman was creating an opportunity for them to talk privately, away from the clinical setting of the hospital. It was a gesture of respect, treating Maria as an equal rather than as a patient or subordinate. They walked to the memorial garden together, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the carefully maintained space. Maria found herself explaining her choices, why she'd planted roses near the main memorial wall, why she'd positioned the benches to catch the morning light, why she'd chosen plants that would bloom throughout the year. "You've created something beautiful here," Dr. Coleman said as they sat on one of the benches. "It's clear you understand what this space means to people." Maria nodded, studying the memorial plaques in front of them. "Everyone deserves to be remembered. Everyone deserves to have their service acknowledged. Including you," Dr. Coleman said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Maria had been so focused on honoring other veterans that she'd never considered applying that same respect to herself. The idea was both foreign and deeply appealing. "I'm not like them," Maria said, gesturing toward the memorial wall. "I came home. And you've been punishing yourself for it ever since," Dr. Coleman observed. "Survivor's guilt is common among veterans, especially those who've lost comrades in combat. But hiding from your own service doesn't honor their memory, it diminishes it." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Maria had been so consumed with guilt over surviving, when others hadn't, that she'd forgotten to honor the service they'd shared. She'd been so focused on what she'd lost that she'd ignored what she'd gained. "I don't know how to be a veteran," she admitted. "I don't know how to carry it forward." "You've been carrying it forward for 3 years," Dr. Coleman said. "Every morning when you tend to this garden, every night when you clean these halls, with the same dedication you brought to caring for wounded soldiers. You've been serving veterans all along, you just haven't been acknowledging it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Rivera, who approached them with respectful caution. "Ladies, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to check, "On the garden before our ceremony this afternoon." "Ceremony?" Maria asked, confusion evident in her voice. Chief Rivera and Dr. Coleman exchanged glances, and Maria realized she'd been set up. This wasn't a casual encounter, it was a carefully orchestrated intervention. "Maria," Dr. Coleman said gently, "the administration has decided to honor your contribution to the Memorial Garden. They want to present you with a certificate of appreciation and formally recognize your service to the veteran community." Maria's heart rate spiked. "I told Janet I didn't want any recognition." "I know," Chief Rivera said. "But sometimes what we want and what we need are different things. This isn't about putting you in the spotlight. It's about acknowledging that your service matters, that you matter." The ceremony was scheduled for that afternoon in the Memorial Garden itself. It would be small, private, attended only by a few staff members and administrators. No media, no public attention, just a quiet acknowledgement of Maria's contribution to the VA community. "I can't," Maria said, panic rising in her voice. "I'm not ready for that kind of attention." "Maria," Dr. Coleman said firmly, "you've been ready for 3 years. You've been serving with honor and dedication since the day you walked through these doors. The only thing that's changed is that people are finally noticing." Chief Rivera knelt beside the bench where Maria was sitting, his expression serious but kind. "Ma'am, I've served with some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. I've seen courage in all its forms, the courage to charge into battle, the courage to save lives under fire, the courage to come home and build a new life when everything you've known has been stripped away." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "What you've been doing here, the way you've been caring for this place and the people it serves, that's courage too. It's time you recognized it." Maria felt tears threatening to spill over. For 3 years, she'd been living in the shadows, convinced that her service was over, that her value as a veteran had ended with her medical discharge. But these two professionals were telling her something different, that her service had continued, that her dedication had value, that she deserved recognition for what she'd been doing all along. "What if I'm not who you think I am?" she asked. "What if I'm just a broken soldier who couldn't find her way back?" "Then you're exactly who we think you are," Dr. Coleman said. "A veteran who's been serving her community with honor and dedication, even when no one was watching, even when she didn't think it mattered." The weight of their words settled over Maria like a blanket. For the first time in 3 years, she felt seen, not as the invisible janitor, but as the veteran she'd always been. The recognition was terrifying and comforting in equal measure. "The ceremony is at 1400 hours, Chief Rivera said, using military time instinctively. "We'll be honored if you'll attend." Maria nodded slowly, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She'd spent 3 years running from recognition, but maybe it was time to stop running and start healing. The hours leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of nervous energy and careful preparation. Maria had gone home to shower and change, trading her custodial uniform for the only dress she owned, a simple navy blue dress that her mother had bought her for her father's funeral. It felt appropriate somehow, wearing something that connected her to family, to loss, to the complicated process of honoring the dead while learning to live. She'd also made a decision that surprised her. She'd pinned the combat medical badge that Chief Rivera had given her to the dress just above her heart. It was a small act of defiance against the anonymity she'd cultivated for so long, a visible acknowledgement of who she'd been and who she remained. The Memorial Garden had been transformed for the ceremony. Someone had arranged folding chairs in a semicircle facing the main memorial wall, and a small podium had been positioned near the rose bush that Maria had planted in her first year at the VA. The setup was simple but dignified, focused on the space itself rather than elaborate decorations. Maria arrived 15 minutes early, her stomach churning with anxiety. The garden looked beautiful in the afternoon light, the flowers she'd chosen blooming in a riot of color against the backdrop of the memorial plaques. She'd created something lasting here, something that would continue to provide comfort and beauty long after she was gone. Dr. Coleman was the first to arrive, followed by Janet and several other staff members whom Maria recognized but had never really talked to. The facility director, a distinguished man named Robert Chun, arrived with Chief Rivera and 2 other members of his SEAL team. The gathering was small but represented different aspects of the VA community: medical staff, administrators, custodial workers, and the veterans they all served. "Maria," Dr. Coleman said, approaching her with a warm smile. "You look lovely. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Maria admitted. "I haven't been the center of attention in years." "You've been the center of attention every day," Dr. Coleman replied. "You just haven't been acknowledging it. Every veteran who's found peace in this garden, every family member who's been comforted by its beauty, every staff member who's been inspired by your dedication, you've been touching their lives all along." The ceremony began with Director Chun speaking about the importance of the memorial garden to the VA community. He talked about how the space had become a place of healing and reflection, how families had found comfort there during difficult times, how the garden had become a symbol of hope and remembrance. But none of this would have been possible without the extraordinary dedication of one person, he said, turning toward Maria. For 3 years, Maria Santos has maintained this garden with a level of care and respect that goes far beyond her job description. She's transformed this space into something sacred, something that honors our fallen heroes while providing comfort to those who survive. Chief Rivera stepped forward to speak next, his voice carrying the authority and respect that came with his rank and experience. "I've had the privilege of serving alongside some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. I've seen courage in combat, dedication under fire, and the kind of selfless service that defines the American military." He paused, looking directly at Maria. "What I've witnessed here at the VA Medical Center is that same level of dedication and service, applied to a different mission, but with the same unwavering commitment. Maria Santos embodies the values that make our military great: honor, courage, and commitment to something larger than herself." The formal recognition came in the form of a certificate of appreciation, but Chief Rivera had added something extra. He presented Maria with a small plaque that read, "In recognition of continued service to America's veterans, your dedication honors those who served and those who serve still." "There's something else," Chief Rivera said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "During my research into Maria's background, I discovered that she served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division. She was awarded the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star with V device for valor, and the Combat Medical Badge for her service under fire." The words hit the small gathering like a thunderclap. Maria had managed to keep her service record private for 3 years, but Chief Rivera had clearly done his homework. The revelation transformed the ceremony from a simple recognition of custodial excellence to an acknowledgement of genuine heroism. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Chief Rivera continued, using her former rank deliberately, saved countless lives during her deployments. She provided medical care under enemy fire, evacuated wounded soldiers from combat zones, and served with distinction in some of the most dangerous areas of operation. Maria felt the weight of everyone's attention, but it was different now. Longer the invisible janitor. She was being seen as who she really was, a veteran who'd served with honor and continued to serve with dedication. The recognition was overwhelming but also liberating. "I want to read something from her citation for the Bronze Star," Chief Rivera said, producing a folded document from his pocket. "Staff Sergeant Santos displayed exceptional courage and selflessness when her unit came under heavy enemy fire. Despite being wounded herself, she continued to provide medical care to injured soldiers, saving multiple lives while under direct enemy observation. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service. The garden was silent except for the sound of wind rustling through the trees. Maria realized that tears were streaming down her face, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of shame or grief. They were tears of recognition, of acceptance, of finally being seen for who she truly was. Janet stepped forward with her own words of appreciation. For 3 years, I've watched Maria work with a level of dedication that went far beyond anything I could have asked for. Now I understand why. She wasn't just cleaning floors and maintaining gardens. She was continuing her service in a different form. The ceremony concluded with Director Chun presenting Maria with a key to the memorial garden, making her the official caretaker of the space she'd been tending all along. It was a symbolic gesture, but it carried real meaning: official recognition of her contribution and formal acknowledgement of her role in the V, a community. As the small gathering dispersed, and Maria stood alone in the garden she'd tended for 3 years, she realized this wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The recognition she'd feared had become the catalyst for a transformation she never saw coming. The weeks following the ceremony brought changes that Maria hadn't anticipated. Word of her military background had spread through the VA medical center, but not in the way she'd feared. Instead of unwanted attention and intrusive questions, she found herself receiving respectful acknowledgement from staff and patients alike. Veterans who'd previously seen her as invisible now nodded with genuine recognition when they passed in the hallways. A few had approached her to share their own stories, creating brief connections that reminded her of the brotherhood she'd lost when she left the military. These interactions were tentative at first, but they carried the weight of shared experience and mutual respect. Dr. Coleman had made good on her offer to talk, and Maria found herself attending informal counseling sessions in the psychiatrist's office. These weren't traditional therapy sessions. They were conversations between two professionals who understood the complexities of military service and civilian transition. "You've made tremendous progress," Dr. Coleman observed during one of their meetings. 3 weeks ago, you were convinced that your service was over, that you had nothing left to contribute. Now you're talking about expanding your role here at the VA. It was true. Maria had been thinking about ways to do more than just maintain the memorial garden. She'd been considering volunteering with the recreational therapy program, maybe helping with the PTSD support groups. Her medical background and combat experience gave her unique insights that could benefit other veterans struggling with their own transitions. "I never thought I'd want to be involved again," Maria admitted. "For 3 years, I convinced myself that hiding was protecting me, but it was actually keeping me from healing." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Dr. Coleman's office door. Chief Rivera entered, still in his dress uniform, but looking less formal than he had during the ceremony. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I wanted to speak with both of you before my team ships out tomorrow." Maria felt a pang of recognition. She remembered the mixture of excitement and apprehension that came with new deployments, the way units bonded together in preparation for the unknown challenges ahead. "How can we help you, Chief?" Dr. Coleman asked. "I wanted to thank you both for what you've done here," he said. "Maria, your story has had an impact on my team that goes beyond what you might realize. Several of my guys have been struggling with the transition from active duty to civilian life, and seeing how you've found purpose in continued service has given them hope." He turned to address Maria directly. "I also wanted to ask if you'd consider sharing your story with other veterans. Not in a big public way, but maybe in small groups, informal settings. There are a lot of people who could benefit from hearing about your journey." The suggestion was both flattering and terrifying. Maria had spent 3 years avoiding attention, and the idea of deliberately seeking it out went against every instinct she'd developed. But she also recognized the potential value of her experience. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," she said honestly. "I'm still figuring out my own story." "That's exactly why it would be valuable," Chief Rivera replied. "You're not claiming to have all the answers. You're showing that it's possible to continue serving even when the path isn't clear, even when you don't feel like you're making a difference." Dr. Coleman nodded in agreement. "There's something powerful about authenticity, about admitting that the transition is difficult while still demonstrating that it's possible. Your story isn't about having everything figured out. It's about finding ways to serve despite uncertainty." The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics ranging from PTSD treatment to veteran employment programs. Maria found herself contributing to the discussion with insights drawn from her own experience and observations. For the first time in years, she felt like her voice had value, like her perspective mattered. After Chief Rivera left, Dr. Coleman and Maria sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. The office overlooked the memorial garden, and they could see the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the carefully maintained space. "How does it feel to be visible again?" Dr. Coleman asked. Maria considered the question carefully. "Different than I expected. Scarier in some ways, but also liberating. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as competent, as someone with something to contribute." "You never stopped being competent," Dr. Coleman pointed out. "You just stopped believing it yourself." The observation was accurate. Maria had spent 3 years convinced that her medical discharge had somehow invalidated her previous service, that her struggles with PTSD and depression had diminished her value as a veteran. The ceremony and its aftermath had helped her realize that service took many forms, that her contribution to the VA community was as valuable as anything she'd done in uniform. "I've been thinking about what Chief Rivera said," Maria admitted, "about sharing my story with other veterans. Maybe starting small, maybe just with individual conversations." "That sounds like a good first step," Dr. Coleman said. "You don't have to become a public speaker overnight. But your experience has value, and there are people who could benefit from hearing it." They discussed practical ways Maria could begin. Sharing her story, perhaps joining existing support groups as a participant rather than a facilitator, maybe volunteering with the peer counseling program, or simply being more open about her background with veterans she encountered in her daily work. "The important thing is that you're choosing to step forward," Dr. Coleman said. "For 3 years you've been serving in the shadows. Now you're starting to serve in the light. That's a significant transformation." As Maria left the office and returned to her duties, she felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for years. The memorial garden was still her sanctuary, but it was no longer her hiding place. It had become a platform for continued service, a place where she could honor the fallen while helping the living. The change wasn't complete. She still felt nervous about increased visibility, still struggled with moments of doubt about her worth and contribution. But for the first time since her discharge, she felt like she was moving forward rather than just surviving. And as the weeks turned into months, that forward momentum would carry her toward opportunities she never could have imagined. 3 months. After the ceremony, Maria stood in the memorial garden at dawn, watching the sun rise over the VA Medical Center. The routine was familiar. She'd been coming here every morning for over 3 years, but her perspective had changed dramatically. She was no longer the invisible janitor hiding from her past. She was Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, continuing her service in a different form. The garden itself had evolved under her care. New plantings had been added, additional benches had been installed, and a small pathway had been created to improve accessibility for veterans in wheelchairs. The changes were subtle but significant, reflecting not just Maria's horticultural skills but her growing understanding of what the space meant to the people who used it. She'd also accepted a new role at the VA. While she continued her custodial duties, she'd been officially designated as the Memorial Garden Coordinator, a position that recognized her expertise and gave her authority to make decisions about the space. It was a small step, but it represented a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and how others saw her. The morning was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman in Army fatigues. She was clearly a recent veteran, her posture and bearing marking her as someone still adjusting to civilian life. Maria recognized the signs, the careful way she surveyed the garden, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself apart from the world around her. "Beautiful morning," Maria said, approaching the young woman with calm confidence. "Yes, ma'am," the woman replied, her response automatic and respectful. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I just started in the prosthetics program here. Someone told me this was a good place to come when you need to think." Maria smiled, recognizing her younger self in the woman's careful reserve. "It is. I'm Maria Santos, and I help maintain this space. Would you like me to show you around?" As they walked through the garden, Maria found herself sharing stories about different sections, which plants had been chosen to honor specific units, how the layout had been designed to provide both solitude and community, why certain memorial plaques had been positioned to catch the morning light. She spoke with the authority of someone who understood both the technical aspects of garden maintenance and the deeper significance of memorial spaces. "You seem to know a lot about this place," Sarah observed. "Have you been here long?" "About 3 years," Maria replied. "I'm also a veteran Army, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I was a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne." The casual way she shared her background was a testament to how much had changed. For 3 years, Maria had hidden her military service like a shameful secret. Now she spoke about it naturally, recognizing it as a source of strength rather than vulnerability. Sarah's demeanor shifted immediately. "Really? I was with the 10th Mountain Division. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan myself. Lost my left leg to an IED near Kandahar." The connection was immediate and profound. Maria had encountered dozens of veterans during her time at the VA, but this was different. She was meeting Sarah as an equal, as someone who understood the specific challenges of military service and civilian transition. "The adjustment is hard," Maria said simply. "Harder than anyone who hasn't been there can understand, but it's possible. It takes time, but it's possible." They sat on one of the benches, and Sarah began to share her story. She'd been medically discharged 6 months earlier, had been struggling with depression and identity issues, felt like she'd lost everything that had defined her as a person. The narrative was painfully familiar to Maria, like hearing her own story told by someone else. "I don't know how to be a civilian," Sarah admitted. "I don't know how to be anything other than a soldier." "You don't have to stop being a soldier," Maria said. "You just have to find new ways to serve. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, it just changes form." The conversation continued for over an hour, covering topics from PTSD treatment to career counseling to the simple challenge of finding purpose in civilian life. Maria found herself drawing on her own experiences, sharing insights that could only come from someone who'd walked the same path. "Would you like to help me with the garden sometime?" Maria asked as their conversation wound down. "I could use someone with your attention to detail, and it might give you something to focus on while you're figuring out your next steps." Sarah's face lit up with the first genuine smile Maria had seen from her. "I'd like that. I've always been good with plants, and this place ... It feels peaceful." As Sarah left to continue her appointments, Maria remained in the garden, reflecting on the conversation. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have been able to offer that kind of support. She'd been too focused on her own struggles, too convinced that her service was over, too afraid of being seen as anything other than the invisible janitor. But now she understood that her most important service was just beginning. The combat medical badge on her uniform shirt, she'd begun wearing it to work every day, represented more than past achievements. It was a symbol of ongoing commitment, a reminder that healing was a continuous process that required the same courage and dedication she'd once brought to combat medicine. The sun was fully up now, and the VA Medical Center was coming to life around her. Maria gathered her gardening tools and prepared to begin her daily rounds, but she was no longer the same person who'd started this journey 3 years ago. She was no longer hiding from her past or running from her identity. She was Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, combat medic, Memorial Garden coordinator, and mentor to the next generation of veterans finding their way home. Her service continued, her purpose was clear, and her story was far from over. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.